Tonight I'm going to introduce you to my family's apple strudel. There are many different recipes for apple strudel. The one that we've always used is made with a paper-thin phyllo dough. I like to buy the dough that comes 13 by 18 inches, and there's 18 sheets to a package. For one strudel recipe, you would only use 2 of the phyllo leaves. This is butter that we will have melted. We use that to paint the strudel leaves, as you'll see as we're doing the recipe. We'll also have breadcrumbs that we brown in butter, and then we have lemon that we'll grate, and cinnamon that we'll add to the beautiful Honeycrisp apples. I prefer Honeycrisp. Any type of baking apple might work, but this is my favorite, is the Honeycrisp. To that, we add 1/3 cup of plump golden raisins and 1/2 cup of chopped walnuts. So measure the walnuts after you've chopped them, and 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. Here we have some cloths that we use. I prefer 100% cotton cloths that we will use to keep the strudel leaves, the phyllo leaves, very nice and moist, and also to roll the strudel up. And this little darling is a goose feather brush, and that's the best to use for the phyllo leaves so that you don't tear them. I'd like to share a story with you about my Grandma Devecca, who was my dad's mom. And I was about 11 years old, and I remember going into her house around Christmas time, and she had the entire dining room table covered with her own recipe to make strudel leaves. At that time, you couldn't buy them in the stores. And she would stretch it out over the dining room table. She'd roll it back and forth, and then she'd stretch it with her very gnarled hands. It was almost draping over the side of the table. And then she would cut it up into 18 by 13 or approximately that pieces, and she would make about 6 to 8 strudels at a time. We're going to preheat our oven to 375 degrees, and then we can start mixing our ingredients. I've just melted 4 tablespoons of salted butter in a frying pan. And to that, I'm going to add 1/2 cup of breadcrumbs. And you need to brown these in the butter, so I mix it up well. Once it's mixed well, you can kind of pat it into the frying pan and just let it sit as it browns on the bottom. You need to watch it very carefully because you don't want it to burn. I have it over a medium heat, so I'll pat it like this and let that brown, and we'll come back to it so that you can see the final results. I'm going to prepare this lemon rind. You take the rind off the entire lemon, and then I will use part of the lemon, about 1/4 of the lemon, and squeeze it onto the apples as I have them cut so they don't turn brown on me. Now these breadcrumbs have browned a couple times, and I loosened them from the pan. You can see the color is a nice golden brown on the bottom, and that's what you want. And I think that they're probably done at this point. So our breadcrumbs are all ready for us to put in the strudel. I like to peel my apples that have been cut into quarters with a nice sharp knife, and then I cut each section into about 4 or 5 slices that I'll just cut across. I want to show you about the size pieces that I'll be making. Then after they're cut into pieces, put them in a bowl. And every once in a while, take a little bit of the lemon, the fresh lemon, and squeeze it on top of the apples and mix them well. was ready. Now we're going to add our lemon zest and a half a cup of granulated sugar, a third of a cup chopped walnuts, and a quarter cup of very nice plump raisins, and a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon. We're at a point now where we're going to take out the strudel leaves. And one of the things you don't want to do, because these leaves can dry out very easily, is to let them dry out. So Grandma always moistens a cloth, just sprinkling it with a little bit of water to lay on top of the strudel leaves as you lay them out. This is the package of strudel leaves, and we had taken them from the freezer 24 hours ahead of time and let them sit in the refrigerator, and then we let them sit out on the counter for about an hour. And they're all rolled up with a piece of plastic wrap. I'm just going to take these out of here because we don't need this. This will be extra. Here are our strudel leaves. And we're ready to start with the strudel. I'll take one leaf, and these are beautiful leaves. They were nice and new in the store. If you get them and they're a little too old, they'll start cracking on you, and it makes the strudel making process very difficult. While I butter this leaf, I don't want these to dry out, so I'll cover this with that towel that I sprinkled with a little bit of water, and that will keep that nice and moist so it doesn't dry out. We've melted butter, about maybe 2 tablespoons in this little dish, and you'll see how nicely this goose feather brush that I think is readily available at most gourmet cooking shops. Be careful not to bring the butter all the way to the edge here, because we're going to seal that, and we don't want with water so that the strudel stays together. Once you've got the bread or the butter on, then you'll lay some breadcrumbs on here. This helps to keep the leaves separate, so you get a nice flaky strudel. And now I'll follow through and put on a second layer of leaves. And again, butter that. Butter always makes everything better, doesn't it? If you run out of butter, you can always heat a little bit more. Now we're ready to put in our apple filling. Now we're ready to add the filling. And you'll notice there's a lot of apples here, a lot more than we'll need for the one strudel. But as long as I'm making it, I'll be like my Grandma Susie, and I'll just keep making apple strudels till I run out of the phyllo dough or apples. I like a pretty fat strudel. You want to have enough apples in it to make it feel like you've really eaten something delicious. Once you get the apples in the strudel, over on the right side, then you take the cloth and you start rolling the strudel. Tucking it under after the first roll. Now I'm going to take just a little fingerful of water and I'm going to put it on this edge of the strudel leaf, and that will make it adhere to the strudel bottom so that all the juices and apples don't leak out. And I like that part to be on the bottom. Then I'll wet the sides here a little bit too. You've been careful when you put your butter on not to get too much butter toward the edges of the sides here. And you can just fold this right up. And you'll see how the water makes it stick together. I found it makes that part of the strudel a little tougher, but it's better to have the juices sealed in. Now I want to have the bottom of the strudel, where the seam is, be on the bottom of the pan. So I'll back this up a little bit, shorten my towel, make sure it's nice and sealed, and roll it right into the pan. There's our beautiful strudel. Now we're ready to paint the strudel with butter on the outside so that it gets nice and flaky when it's cooked and adds a little bit more of that delicious butter flavor. And then we'll be able to bake it for about 30 minutes in our preheated oven at 375. And now we're ready to put the strudel in the oven. Again, it will bake at 375 for about 30 minutes until it's nicely browned on top. Well, now our strudel is done, and I have to say this is a brand new oven that we're cooking in. And it looks like it cooks a little hotter, but it's just beautifully, beautifully browned. I think it's just perfect. I would let the strudel cool about 15 minutes, put it on a rack so it cools well, and then you can cut it into servings. This would make anywhere from 4 to 6 servings. Now this is the best part of the strudel, except for when you make extra strudels and you have some to share with family. Now my Luke likes to put whipped cream on his strudel. Some people like to put a little powdered sugar, shake a little powdered sugar, but look at the beautiful texture of this apple strudel. I want to finish with just another story. My mother, of course, learned to make strudel because my father's mother was the one that made it, so she had to learn to make it. And she would use a special cloth that she liked to use. It was a nice 100% cotton piece of cloth to roll the strudel with. Well, my dad would use it many times to wipe the dishes with. So to make sure that that wouldn't happen, she bought fresh yardage and she hand embroidered in red on the white towels, no strudel cloth, so that he wouldn't use it to dry the dishes with. But he still was able to enjoy his wonderful strudel made for him by his wife Vera. And she passed it on to me, and I've passed it on to my grandchildren. Bon appetit.